Hello and welcome to Can We Have Your Attention, and a very happy new year if you're listening to this at the start of 2026. This is James. Claire and I will be back next week with a normal episode all about attention and the media. But first, this episode is a follow-up to one we did at the end of last year with Dr Stephen Heron. Now, you might remember that was all about radicalisation and attention. Well, just before the break, we spoke to Dr Katherine Albertson from Sheffield Hallam University. And full disclosure, although Kathy and I have not met, I am doing some associate lecturing at Sheffield Hallam, so there you go, that's your full disclosure. Anyway, Kathy spends a lot of her time researching in prisons, and a lot of what Stephen spoke about was around the problems faced by people coming out of the military and how their attention is grabbed, and also then how you go into radicalisation, how they become criminalised. Well, Kathy then works with people in prison to discover how they feel and her attempt to find a sense of community within that space, so those people can start to be rehabilitated and discover new confidence and their own social standing. It is a really wide-ranging discussion. It's really interesting. Kathy's a great guest. We talk about peer mentors, the challenges facing young men in particular, and, of course, social media. But let's get Kathy to introduce herself.
My name's Dr Katherine Albertson, and I work at Sheffield Hallam University, and I am an associate professor in criminology. Does anyone know what an associate professor is? My students look at me funny, and I said, well, do you know what? It's a professor in waiting. Okay, you just got to do a bit, which is basically the definition. I haven't quite come up to scratch yet, up to snuff, you know how it is. So I spend a lot of my time researching across criminal justice. I'm not one of these career academics, I'm afraid, who's got it all strategically worked out. I just go, ooh, that's interesting. The most fascinating things I find I come across is when I'm out there in the real world, because academia very often doesn't feel like the real world. It's kind of like a microcosm. And so I get my sort of esteem from outside of the university, where I'm treated like an expert. So I went into Doncaster, or Doncatraz as we call it, locally, and I cried all the way home, James.
I should say I'm from Scunthorpe, so I can understand you crying when you go to Doncaster, but that's entirely a local rivalry thing.
Story, yeah. So, I said I'd never do it again, but it was so fascinating because you feel like you're getting a window into a world that you just think, what is this about? It's so different. It's a whole different set of rules, languages, and kind of, so you feel a bit like an anthropologist. And then I suppose I'm just very interested in other people's lives, and the fact that their lives aren't like mine, I don't find that difficult or a threat. I just want to see the world through other people's eyes, because how can you understand experiences? So obviously I'm a qualitative researcher, and I spend a lot of time talking to people. So I know I've done a great job. When people have said to me, are you going to start interviewing me yet? And I'm like, damn, I'm good. You haven't even known, that because it is really a structured conversation. So I'm always thinking, what's coming next? Should I probe what's being said? I don't quite understand that, that kind of thing. So yes, anyway, that's a very long-winded way of saying what I do, but I'm just very curious. And I find people in the criminal justice system fascinating in the sense that I just want to help, because life's hard enough without that added complication, which generally tends to make things even tougher.
Yeah, I know Claire, again, has got thousands of questions for you. Let me just start with one, and let me be topical here for a moment. Everything we read about at the moment about the criminal justice system in the UK, at least, it appears to me on the face of it bad news, right? We hear about massive overcrowding, we hear about prisoner releases, and so on and so on and so on. Is it as bad as we read?
Well, there are a lot of prisons out there, and all I can say, having just completed an analysis of 119 prison inspection reports, but there are some prisons that are better than others. But the fact is, you look at any public institution, the NHS, the higher education sector, it's all under pressure because we've been in this, what do they call it, austerity for so long now, and we've got cost of living crisis. It's, is it more for less or less for more? Anyway, whichever way round, it's not good across the board, is it? But I suppose what I find difficult is that, yes, things are not great. We've got staffing crises. We've got cohorts of young officers that are coming in, and it's great because they're more diverse than they were before, but some of them are a little bit afraid, and the prisons can smell it a mile off, as you can imagine. But, they'll get there. And that's why you need this kind of, because we were, peer mentoring is what I've most recently done in prison. But that's the same for staff. And I suppose if you're going to ask me what my approach was, I'm a sociologist by trade. I did a sociology degree and a PhD. And I've come into criminology, and there are many parallels and similarities. But I suppose my argument is that you should start with a sort of like a community first approach. To answer your question, James, I would say that there is some amazing work that goes on day to day in prisons. Fantastic. There are staff and prisoners who go above and beyond every day of the week, because you are throwing a load of people who are frightened and alone. They've been cut off. That some of them don't even know they're going to prison. They're distressed. I mean, about the proportions of people in prison who have come from care. So they've already got sort of problematic relationship formation already. The mental health needs, neurodiversity, they're all there. There's a report, it's a few years old now, but it's called the Balancing Act report. And I read it, and I thought things were difficult. My chin hit the floor because I was amazed. And actually, you can look back at some of the theorists that took, prisons, the rich get richer and, the poor get prison. You go into prison and you will see that should these people be in prison or should they be in hospitals or therapeutic centres? But it's coming through because, we're starting to realise that therapeutic communities really do work. And I've seen, and it's now being modelled in the prisons. So it's a work in progress, I think is fair to say, James.
Well, it's so interesting because last week we spoke to Dr. Stephen Heron, who I know you know, and he spoke very clearly, I thought, about radicalisation and about how the way to tackle that is about having institutions and about having those communities. You're talking about the same thing about prison and prisoners and about developing communities, but I know Claire's got loads of things to ask you. So why don't you start, Claire?
Yeah, I think, picking up on that thread, over the course of this podcast, I think one of the things that's really strongly come out as we've been looking at the attention economy and some of the problems that plague it is a really big problem is one, isolation, and interconnected to it, to uncertainty. Are people able to respond to uncertainty? How do they deal with that? And especially when they do feel isolated. And prison seems to be almost the pressure cooker of those two problems, right? Your work with peer mentoring, how did that come about? First, I should ask, what's a peer mentor?
My definition of peer mentor, is somebody who is going through the same thing as you are at the same time. So the fact is that if you have somebody, one of your neighbours is having a baby and you're pregnant about the same time, that would be a peer. But having somebody who's had a baby, but the baby's a year old or 10 years old or 25 years old, they're still on that spectrum, but they've lived through it and they've survived. Whereas when you're pregnant, it's your first baby, you don't really know what the hell's going on or what to expect. So again, it links into your thing about anxiety levels, because you've not experienced it before. So a peer mentor, I would say it's that synchronicity. It's a big word, but it means just together. So you're experiencing the same thing. So you can talk about, well, they told me this. Oh, don't worry, I heard that, but they also added that. So you can reassure one another, and it's like two heads are better than one to negotiate.
It's perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You've got lived experience. These are people who are no longer subject to the sort of mandated criminal justice restrictions, i.e. they're not in prison or on probation. I did a piece of work across 4 very differently profiled prisons, one a women's, one a lifers unit in a Cat B it was, I think.
Which is the second most serious level in the British legal system.
Yeah, and the fact is that every single one of them said, we have people that come in and deliver talks on our course who are lived experience, and they're inspirational. They've got out of prison, they've made, great strides in their life, and they've got their own business, great, but they're not my peer. because we're in here, they're not. We hear very little from prisoners' voices because they're, among the most marginalised. Nobody wants to hear from prisoners. And they basically argued that no, the people who they're in prison with are their peer mentors. When they leave, they said that would be more helpful. So it's that context and situation is all, isn't it? Because you can have been in prison. You might have been in prison 5-10 years ago and things are different. There are 130 prisons in the UK. Not every prison is the same.
But, some of the problems that I think we're facing today generally in communities, and particularly among, young men in particular, I think, who are targeted by extremist groups, it occurs to me that they're often missing that transitional element or appreciation of what that is. I think there's this, as a society, maybe we think you just make friends easily, and we're only just starting to understand that that doesn't work that way anymore. And particularly if you leave school, some of your peers will go to university, some won't, some will go into training, but you might not have someone at the same stage as you, and having something in place to help facilitate that. So you're not just left to your own devices looking for peers and then finding them in the wrong places is one way to address that.
Absolutely. I mean, they used to say it takes a village to bring up a child.
Yeah.
Where's that village? Sorry, get all political, but, the Thatcher years kind of put an end to kind of a lot of the communities that used to kind of like help bring, that was our version of the kibbutz, the sort of like coal mining communities where people would look after each other's kids. But you're absolutely right, relating it to what's happened in modern society. We no longer have an industrial base where young men used to start down the coal pit or in the big factories and the furnaces, and it'd be the older men that'd be clipping them around the ear and saying, "Don't you speak to women like that?" Do you know what I mean? But in terms of making friends and all this kind of social media, that's all before my parenting, thank goodness, where, how you are received and treated and excluded and bullied, it just scares me to death. Because if you're reading these kind of messages and people are making you feel like you're belonging, it's not rocket science. Of course, you're going to go towards it. Whereas if you've got an older brother or somebody in your immediate peer group saying, "Oh, you don't want to read that. Listen to that load of rubbish," and it kind of almost kind of keeps you. What's the word? Kind of contains you and says, "Oh, that's not worth. Oh no, that's not worth giving any credit by," or at least somebody who can kind of say, "I'm a bit concerned," and then you end up in the whole prevent kind of arena, which is incredibly difficult to negotiate. And of course, as an academic, we're teaching students, there are parallels to be drawn around the kind of students who I have a duty of care towards, where I go if I'm particularly concerned. But, and bringing this back, it's not just people who engage in criminal justice system and get caught up in all these, awful kind of like grooming into terrorist organisations. I see it in my students every day. This, whether it's post-COVID as well, that's bound to have impacted on them. But just talking to each other. So from my research of watching people transitioning in and out of the military, in and out of prison, in and out of the criminal justice system, I just apply that, and I give them something really hard to do in a group of people they've never met before. And do you know what? They make friends because they have to. So it's that thing about socialising them into a kind of environment where they can all dislike me because I'm making them do this really hard thing. I'm big enough, ugly enough.
Nothing unites like a common enemy.
Absolutely. And they can hide behind one another because they're groups of 5 or 6, and there'll be the one that's a bit more confident. They'll go, "Kathy, I didn't understand."
Which we're going to stress is a good thing.
Yes,
it's a good thing.
Absolutely. So you're not being put on the spot as an individual. Why haven't you done this task? It's kind of the group, and they've just gone through with this hard thing I gave them to do to explain county lines and AI crime nexus to school kids. And they were brilliant. Honestly, they really stood up to the mark because they were given a responsibility.
I was wondering if, we're in a podcast ostensibly about the attention economy, although, frankly, that goes into so many different areas of life. I mean, it's mad. But do you think as a result we are as a society, not paying enough attention to specific subsets of society. So, for example, are we not paying enough attention to young men and what they need, to pick one area that we've spoken about quite a lot recently?
Personally, I absolutely agree. Having brought up 2 boys and a girl, they're in their sort of early 30s now, just starting to have babies and all those like really adult things, which scares me still. But the point is that you're absolutely right. And I struggled with the boys at school because of these kind of attitudes towards this whole gender thing. And it feels like we've gone from men good, girls bad, to boys bad, girls good. Honestly, it's just such a massive shift. And I do worry because, to me, it's not about handing over the kind of like power to another group of people. It's about sharing it equally between us. And I certainly know my lads really struggled. Going back to your point, James, I brought this up. Again, it's a very contentious issue, particularly in academia at the moment. But we've had 2 major reports that demonstrate that young, white, working class men are less likely to come to university than all the other groups that we traditionally think of as being marginalised. So you're absolutely right. What are they doing, James? Because the industry isn't there. You know, if you're not academically gifted, what do you do? How do you get your sense of status and belonging and that you're an important person? Do you see, where do you get it from if you can't get it from the work's not there?
I read a really interesting piece maybe a week or so ago, which said that perhaps part of the reason for this is that there is an inbuilt belief that, you know, white young men have had an inbuilt advantage for the last 3,000 years. So why should we worry if they just don't have one at this point? But I do think it's interesting in terms of attention and in terms of the attention that we give on them, because there is no political initiative, is there, really, at the moment, to do so other than the kind of reform area, the kind of MAGA area. And that's why they're drawn towards something, because as Dr. Stephen Heron said on our last episode, you know, that's hope in one form or another for a certain subset of people.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But with respect, I'm going to push you back on you there, James. Think about your history. Have white working class men really had it so good? Okay, but men suffer from the patriarchy, all right? You know, Peterloo massacre, we're talking about British history here, which kids don't get spoken to. You know, you got the Luddite Rebellion.
It's slightly different in the US, but yeah, you're completely right. Like the GI Bill changed things in
you
the
know,
US,
and I at work, I have to keep saying, excuse me, some men, right? Because again, I teach on, you know, sexual violence, violence against women and girls. And the fact of the matter is not all men are rapists, okay? Such a tiny, tiny minority. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take away from what an awful crime that is. But the thing is that, you know, when you're perpetually kind of given these kind of messages, you have young men that just feel that they don't have a place because they're bad. Who can be bothered? Who can be bothered with them?
Yeah, I think there's something this. So I'm going to pull it back to the attention economy again, because as you're talking, Catherine, I'm thinking about 15 years ago when we were looking at things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Those were seen as an entirely different category to media, right? So when the few academic people who talked about the attention economy in those days were really talking about mass media. They were talking about television, newspapers, you know, film. Like, they were not talking really about social media. And social media was seen to be something different, right? It was seen to be
alternative
social media.
Yeah.
And I think recently social media is no longer social, right? It is entertainment, but nothing's filled that gap. You know, in that 15-year period, all of our community social structures, or a lot of them, have changed or gone away. And because there's been this assumption that you could just move that online, or that all happens online and it'll take care of itself. And there's nothing in the meantime that's filled that gap. And even as you're talking, Catherine, you know, a friend of mine said something really insightful a little while ago. You know, we were talking about this issue with, you know, young white working class men. And he said, look, you know, they're not, retail jobs aren't even available to them, right? Like 15, 20 years ago, you could have, you know, you expected, well, if all else fails, at least, you know, I know I can manage a shop. I can manage a Phones for You or McDonald's or a branch of Next or something. And even those jobs have gone away, right? Like they don't exist. So there's nothing filling those gaps. You've lost you've lost anything that forms community, right? And gives you a sense of status, and nothing has replaced it because we've assumed that the existence of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter will replace those social structures, that university is the catch-all social structure for any 18-year-old, and nothing else fills its place. So if you were made prime minister tomorrow, Catherine, but thinking about it from those terms, right? Like, how do you find peers in these really important transitional moments of your life? What would you restore, or what would you set up from your experience of putting people together into networks effectively?
Well, I think it's that thing about, we talk about globalization and all these things happening way over our heads, but there are winners and there are losers, and sadly they're the traditional ones. And the kind of localized agendas, I think, are even more appealing than they were before. So the fact is, it's about geographic communities, because that way you've got much more a chance of actually having human interaction. And I kind of do wonder, because unless you keep doing something, so interacting with other human beings, hi, how are you, did your daughter pass a driving test, how's the baby, all those kind of community, down the shop, just popping into the post office, which they're disappearing as well, that whole thing. And the whole sort of British culture based around the pub, that's all changed as well. So it feels like, how many pubs get closed every week now? It's a frightening number, isn't it? But the thing is it's, so where are these community spaces now? Do you know what? I don't know what I do, Claire. I don't know what I would do. I don't want to be Prime Minister, thank you.
I think that's the number one conclusion everyone's saying. Like,
yes,
maybe
absolutely, yeah. But the thing is that despite the fact that the world has changed, the education sector, the whole employment sector, the community sector, everything's changed. Human beings still have needs. Status needs, belonging needs. Now, if we're not going to fill that void, we're all going to end up talking to Stephen Heron every other day of the week, because, where do you get them from? I mean, I suppose it's the same argument about whether you get your belonging and sense of importance from legitimate, less legitimate, or really not legitimate at all sources. So the point is that it's opportunities for everyone to be able to gain some sense of being an important person in the community. That's why these kind of peer mentor roles, big society it used to be called years ago, but the essence is similar. But of course, in order for us to do that, you have to stop putting the priority on paid employment. I don't know, maybe a universal basic income?
Ooh, radical. No, that's actually probably not even that radical anymore.
It isn't. It used to be a few years ago. But then, of course, alongside that, you have to have the kind of the whole public sort of NHS medical kind of, you have to have the structures to support that. But the fact is if, for example, if you had a universal basic income, and then you could earn a bit more on top of that if you really want to. But some of us would kind of go, well, actually, I can pay the rent, I can pay the mortgage or whatever. And then I can spend my time in the community doing things with and for people. So that's what I've got planned for my retirement. I found loads of places I want to go and volunteer. But of course, until I'm not reliant on that salary so much. So I don't know. It needs exploring. Yeah, it does need exploring, I think.
That's Dr Katherine Albertson. Thank you so much to her for that really interesting chat, and that has, I'm sure, sparked a lot of thoughts with you. Claire and I will be back next week. If you want to get in touch with us, you can at any time. Can we have your attention at protonmail.com is the email address. Please do get in touch. We'll speak to you next week. Thanks.